This episode's brought to you by the Public Domain Shop, a clothing brand inspired by classic literature and film. Use the code Wolff to get 10% off your next sweatshirt purchase. Kind of ironic Gus Van Sant's made movies with not one but two Skarsgårds. The circumstances behind the true life story of Dead Man's Wire were so strange yet fascinating that when I went to see it at TIFF, I avoided most of the other plot details, hoping I'd be more surprised during the film. And the casting of Bill Skarsgård, Colman Domingo, Cary Elwes, and Al Pacino being directed by Gus Van Sant, who hasn't made a movie in almost a decade, convinced me even more to check it out. But while I can't say this was a bad movie by any means, the intent I found kinda questionable. The movie centers on Tony Kiritsis, played by Bill Skarsgård, who, in 1977, after falling behind on payments and believing a father-son mortgaging family were trying to steal his home, kidnaps the son, Dick Hall, played by Dacre Montgomery, and wires both their necks to a shotgun. Should either of them fall or Skarsgård get shot, Dick dies. And from there we see the hostage negotiations, response from the media, and the father mortgager, played by Al Pacino. Even after an 8-year absence, Gus Van Sant still has it as a filmmaker. He directs Dead Man's Wire like a movie set in the 70s with grainy 16mm, and in more intense situations cuts back and forth from standard film and aspect ratio to 4x3 newsreel style, and even freeze-frame shots of characters before segueing into their actions. And it added to the action going on within each scene. The soundtrack, based on what Tony Kiritsis listened to on the radio, is made up of catchy old-school jazz numbers that add levity to the situation. And it goes without saying, Bill Skarsgård, for those unique facial expressions and vocal talents of his, gives an equally charismatic, eccentric, and disturbed performance as always without missing a beat. That's enough to sympathize with him without condoning his actions. Sort of. You can tell in his calmer moments and the few pleasant conversations he has with Dick, he didn't set out to harm anyone, genuinely believing that this was the only way to get what he believed he deserves, even apologizing for his swearing, let alone his actions to the police, a call-in DJ, and even Dick when he's not belittling him for being a nepo baby. Based on how much of his plan was prepared in advance versus what was improvised, Tony Kiritsis was a smart individual who could stick to a plan under pressure. But when Dick, the police, or anyone else tests his patience, Skarsgård hits that perfect level of loud and over the top that shows his instability and built-up rage he's experiencing that could weirdly vary from dramatic, suspenseful, and even funny when his weirder personality traits come out in his negotiating. Out of all the side characters, the one who left the biggest impact for me was easily Al Pacino as Dick's father, and given his career choices the past few years, it's good to see him back in a Pacino-type role. He's only in a few scenes, and he is technically meant to be the sleaziest character in the film. More on that later, but out of his 3 main moments, there's a phone call between him and Kiritsis where he goes John Paul Getty on his ass, laying it down that the one with the shotgun's the only villain in this scenario, and on the one hand it's made clear he's an entitled old prick who's used to having people bow down to him over money, but even if you think Kiritsis genuinely got screwed over, you have to admit Pacino's character stood his ground and knew how to take the threat and power away from a kidnapper, and it was Pacino's intimidating presence that made the entire scene. The other side characters, on the other hand, are stuck playing pretty forgettable characters, some of whom didn't even need to be in the movie. Myha'la could have been interesting as this reporter who gets too ambitious when she sees this story as a way up the corporate ladder, but her performance came off very flat and robotic. She sounded more like Julie Haggerty reading to kindergartners when she was doing her news reports. But in their defense, the more veteran actors make the most of what they can. If you just want to see Colman Domingo play a smooth-talking DJ who gets caught up in the negotiations, he's charismatic as always, even if he doesn't play as big a part as he thinks he does, and his arc is completely unresolved. But my favorite next to Pacino has gotta be Cary Elwes, whose makeup and American accent were so good I didn't even recognize him. It's proof that he actually can do an American accent if he tried. Jokes aside, he's the main cop who knows Tony and as a result, knows what to say or do when trying to talk some sense into him or negotiate terms. That being said, it was a little hard for me to feel any fear for Dacre Montgomery's character because, in my opinion, his performance is hands down the best in his career, and most of my gripes have to do with how he's directed, but he did seem too calm under such immense life or death pressure to me. The movie's excuse for this is that he was raised to be a stoic, and I know the intent is his bravery, even when a gun's pointed at him 24/7, is what's supposed to make him at least an admirable character. And there is a way to portray brave yet vulnerable characters. I just think Montgomery's facial expressions were too stoic. He only looked tired, no real show of anxiety until the last half hour. He's not bad. Again, objectively, I think this is his best acting. I just didn't buy the suppressed fear he's supposed to have. And to be fair, it doesn't help that A, the side cast, while on their own are pretty underutilized, collectively have more time to shine than Montgomery, who we don't even see with his family, who could have humanized him until the finale. And B, we never see his interactions with Tony before the kidnapping. Dead Man's Wire made an interesting decision to start right away with the kidnapping, with all the context being told through exposition. Hell, the reporters going around covering the story, not once do I remember them even looking for those answers, which admittedly is the point. They cover the story for ratings and ratings only, moving on once it's lost national attention, same as it is now. But it comes at the expense of leaving out so many vital backstories and plot details either never shown or are told not shown. And honestly, I'd much rather see flashbacks just to know for sure whether or not Kiritsis really did fall behind on payments, or if the Halls legitimately were trying to steal his house, because, and this part's really fucking important, based on what we're shown in the movie, especially the arguments Skarsgård and Pacino have in the film, Tony Kiritsis doesn't have any real proof that he was screwed over. He just repeats over and over that he was, and that's it. It's a he said, she said scenario where we're just supposed to believe him because he says so and he's poor. Compared to Pacino giving clear, blunt statements with information that I'm pretty sure paperwork can back up. But I guess because he's a rich guy who's as polite as polio, fuck evidence, he's the real bad guy. And I'm sorry, but life doesn't work that way. Regardless of what evidence you have, you can't just take justice in your own hands. Especially if the evidence may all be in your head, otherwise you either become the piece of shit you claim to fight against, and the smallest thing you do to someone else, they'll have an excuse to fuck you up. Not naming any names here, because let's face it, you already have. Hell, a couple of these instances happened after I wrote this review. So in the end, it's hard for me to know what to make of Dead Man Wire's intentions, but as a film, it is pretty standard. Gus Van Sant's made stranger films that have failed harder than this, but that is part of his charm. He always takes a chance, bears the responsibility for it, and moves on to something else, and I'm always going to appreciate that about him. And with that, guys, thanks as always for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Dead Man's Wire. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, check me out on Patreon and buy me a coffee, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.